Hi, good evening, everyone. Thanks for joining us at this session on the adaptation agenda. If you've been listening to what the scientists are saying, well, we are at 1.2. We will overshoot and go beyond 1.5, and the ride will be very, very rough. Right? That's not from me, that's from the scientists. And each year we'll run a survey. What are the top global risks that you see? This is a survey that talks to global leaders around the world. And prognosis or outlook for the next 10 years on the top half is always environmental related risks, right? Extreme weather events, biodiversity, ecosystem collapse, natural resource shortages, goes on. And the view that people are holding right now, it's a gloomy one. Basically, the view is that the outlook will be stormy and turbulent. Right, but what we are also finding in the various conversations we've been convening with PwC since last year, right, is that there is a disconnect between business action and how they are feeling about the risks that are looming. Right, yesterday night I was at a dinner. I spoke about the 6 shades of green. Right, you might know one at least, greenwashing. Obviously, there's also green hushing. There's green lighting, talking about things that you're doing well, but then not talking about things that you're not doing so well. I won't go into all 6 shades, but one of them is actually what I'll call green crowding, which is that you stay with the crowd and then you kind of feel safe, right? And I feel that maybe the adaptation agenda is suffering from this green crowding agenda because businesses are not responding or the peers are not responding, and everybody kind of feel that it's okay, maybe it's not that bad, right? And hence the report, there are 2 reports that we're launching today are actually very critical, right? One is on the business stocktake on adaptation. It goes into a little bit of analysis as to why there is this disconnect between business action and the risks that we know is slightly underestimated. And this risk is not risk over the next 50 years, it's risk over the next 10. Right? But the second report is the one that I also want to emphasize because it's the one that actually tells us where the opportunities for action are. Right, which is the role of innovation. And innovation can take the form not just of startups, but it can be innovation in business models, innovation in policy, innovation in how we think about collaboration with each other, right? And on this note, I do want to invite our moderator and a very distinguished panel that we have with us today. Osa is the research director of the Stockholm Environment Institute and has been very instrumental in helping launch this white paper. And please, Osa. And maybe before I invite them, I should also introduce myself, which I always forget. I'm Kim Hui, Managing Director at the World Economic Forum, and I head up our climate and nature agenda. So, Osa, the floor is yours, and I'll invite you to also invite the panelists.
Thank you, Kim Wei and the World Economic Forum for inviting us to this important discussion. I'm very proud to represent the Stockholm Environment Institute today. Thank you very much. And the wider Adaptation Without Borders partnership. At SEI, our International Climate Risk and Adaptation team have been contributing adaptation science to IPCC reports, to UN reports for over 2 decades. But we're now very excited to be a knowledge partner to the World Economic Forum and the wider business community, which is clearly now determined to make a push on adaptation. And to make that push not just based on adaptation science, but really solid analysis of barriers, opportunities facing businesses today, and also how business could strengthen their social innovation partnerships, which these 2 reports set out. So our research on adaptation, vulnerability, resilience at SEI has, I think, reflected a broader trend in policy and society. At first, some 30 years ago, adaptation was seen as something very technical, something local, something projectized, and we researched it through case studies. This meant that learning was limited, not scaled, policy attention was limited, investment insufficient, and so-called autonomous adaptation, a term used by the IPCC, referring to adaptation within and by the private sector, was very much a black box. And then we saw a first wave of change some 15 years ago, and the recognition of the need for public policy frameworks and public planning, national adaptation planning, to build more society-wide knowledge, awareness of climate risk, to assess it properly, to legislate what is a private responsibility, public responsibility, to build a infrastructure, make the public investments, and to monitor progress. Against this background, though, the Adaptation Without Borders partnership was sort of unhappy with its still very place-based territorial framing, not recognizing the transboundary nature of much of climate risk and how we need to address it through value chains, supply chains. So today, finally, I think we see this second wave now gaining momentum of business engagement with adaptation. So today we are indeed launching 2 reports, one focusing more on large business, the business stocktake, and one focusing on social entrepreneurs. And they clearly together set out how business can step up and start filling this massive adaptation gap that UNEP recently identified, the need for finance and investment somewhere in the order of $200 to $400 billion per year this decade. And as we know, business engagement is driven by both risk and opportunity. On the risk side, we already heard that failed adaptation is indeed, I believe, the second strongest risk, long-term risk for business in the Global Risk Report. Already today, there are some 2,000 climate-related disruptions per month that are disrupting supply chains. On the opportunity side, we need to do a bit more research, but the aim is to define the market for adaptation and point companies in the right direction. As much as we need to step up mitigation to climate change, businesses will need to innovate and put to market adaptation products and services to fill this adaptation gap. Despite this compelling business case, along the 3 pillars we heard about, enhancing resilience in existing operations and value chains, capitalizing on the opportunities of this emerging global adaptation market, and thirdly, shaping collaborative outcomes with governments and communities. The business stocktake reports that there are still several barriers. For example, physical climate risk is not yet perceived to have a significant impact on strategy and operations. I hope we will hear more about these barriers. But the report doesn't stop short there. It goes into how business and government can work together to overcome these barriers, first by engaging in collective learning and enhancing knowledge of climate risks and opportunities, maybe also encouraging the first movers to be role models in their sectors. And second, making climate risk assessment and disclosure the norm, perhaps crafting that incentive structure and ecosystem that we see around science-based targets for decarbonization today. Third, fostering collaboration, and fourth, engaging in stronger public-private dialogue. The second report, Grassroots to Boardrooms, Social Innovation Partnerships for Climate Adaptation, is an excellent companion to this structured and systemic approach of the first report in several ways. It highlights inspiring examples that we need to hear of adaptation action and gives us a glimpse of that emerging market for adaptation. And it also tells us how we can build worker resilience, for example, in the face of climate migration, how we can build water towers for water harvesting and storage by using local materials, and how we can build out regenerative agriculture and scale it. Most importantly, it shows how businesses can work with social entrepreneurs to ensure localized and community developed solutions. Social innovators help us to fuse bottom-up and top-down strategies and afford to be nimble, to take risk, and to experiment. So we have the power of structure and system, and we have the power of entrepreneurship and imagination coming together with these 2 reports. And a question I hope we will dig deeper into in the panel discussion is how to work more effectively together as stakeholders in adaptation. Business, government, civil society, international organizations, and academia. So with that, I will now invite up our esteemed panel and to delve deeper into these questions. What contributions can large and small businesses make to adaptation, and how can we overcome the barriers? So I'm very pleased to invite up Emma Cox, Helmi Abouleish, and Faike Sibesma. If you please join me on stage and let's give them a hand. There we go. So we are very happy to have with us today Emma Cox, who is a global climate leader at PwC UK. We have Helmi Abouleish, chairman and CEO of Sechem Group in Egypt. And we have Faike Sibesma, who is chairman of the supervisory board of Royal Philips, also co-chair of the Global Center of Adaptation, and a former long-time CEO of DSM. So I wanted to start with you, Emma. You were involved in the business stocktake adaptation. Can you tell us a bit more? What was it? Why did you do it? And what were the most important learnings?
Certainly, and it's a pleasure to be here and talking about this really important topic with people who care about actually bringing it to the forefront of business and government attention and looking at how we can build it together. So I think you set out already how we were on a journey with the World Economic Forum and yourselves to help understand what the business case was, and a year ago launched a framework, a very simple framework of 3 pillars of enhancing resilience, capitalizing on opportunities, and shaping collaborative outcomes. But what we wanted to do was then to actually take stock of, well, is business actually acting on this? Where are they on this journey? So we did a survey of 30 large Forbes 2000 businesses and asked them questions about the importance of adaptation, mitigation to them, what types of actions that they were taking. And I want to share just very briefly a few of the answers that came up from those companies, both through the survey and then through dialogue, and with the wider community that we've had around it. And then actually we drew out from that both some conclusions of where we are and some suggestions of the areas that need more help. I've actually been encouraged by how many discussions there have been around adaptation here at COP this year, and the prominence that it's being given because of, as you said, the climate feeling much more tangible. But I would say business has a long way to go. That would be my kind of opening remark. So the first surprising statistic, I think, is that 60% of the businesses surveyed thought that taking action on mitigation was a very high priority, but only 27% thought that taking action on adaptation was a high priority. So if you start with the fact that most of them didn't see it as a very high priority, although only 20% said their boards really weren't interested at all. So you've got a bit of a disconnect coming here where people are kind of philosophically interested, but they're not sure it really applies to them in terms of the business itself. So we ask questions around the different areas. Let me see if this works. Always, as a consultant, love a good graph. Across the 3 pillars, and you can read it in the report later, we asked a question: have you assessed the impacts of physical climate risk on your business? And 80% of them happily said yes. So things like TCFD have really helped people realize that they need to understand that climate risk. Then asked, actually, what actions are you taking? How many of you are taking actions to address it? That number drops really markedly to only a third. Only about half the sample actually thought that they were exposed to material risk of impacts from a changing climate. And again, you start to ask, well, is that really real? Do you really understand the interdependencies of your supply chain? We then asked, are you working with suppliers and communities in your value chain to enhance their business resilience? And that number falls dramatically, just down to a handful, right? 7%. So when you think how interconnected global supply chains are and how, for example, about blocking, a key canal stopped supply of toys or semiconductors or, other products, I think there's a disconnect here in actually what the reality check is going on. When you come on, though, to capitalising on opportunities, you get quite an interesting story. So actually, when asked, have you identified opportunities from climate risk and adaptation, 67%, two-thirds, said, yep, we can understand that there are opportunities. And then nearly all of them that have identified that there are opportunities are taking action on it because they can see a business in doing that. And almost half can see how they can develop products and services around that climate adaptation. And so those might be new product lines, developing into new markets, that type of area. So I think it's really positive to see that as a business opportunity. A smaller proportion are also seeing that there's an opportunity from taking more efficient measures over how they build their products, use their supply chains, or mitigate their exposures. And then the third pillar, which is about shaping collaborative outcomes, this recognises that adaptation is hyperlocal, you can't solve it on your own, it's very interconnected with the circumstances and where you live. So the vast majority here felt that business had a role to play. 87% said, wrong way. That work? Sorry. Oh, we did it at the same time. Can you bring it up, Eric? Okay, so while the slides are coming back, so the second slide just says that 87% of the respondents recognise that businesses had a role to play. So this is thinking, I think, actually about shareholder versus stakeholder capitalism. This is an understanding that actually business plays a wider role. And the vast majority also thought there ought to be multi-stakeholder efforts on adaptation. And almost half were doing some sort of work in the communities. But when you then said, well, have you actually taken really tangible steps? Have you committed financial resources? Have you set definitive targets towards this? The number falls off again. So it's rather like I was saying about have you really understand your exposure in your supply chain? As soon as it goes beyond the company's borders, there's much less understanding. And I think that then comes to some of the challenges that you were alluding to in your opening remarks. So this is a much less well understood priority. Typically, a lot of the adaptation measures still sit within a sustainability community. They don't necessarily have clear board governance and board representation. They don't necessarily fit into a plan that is set out as adaptation. And in fact, there may be a lot of measures that are going on that actually are adaptive measures, but haven't been called that as such. So putting into investment decision processes. And here I'd just call out that we made a little deep dive into actually, are there instances of maladaptation? Are you actually thinking simply of withdrawing from an area or a region because of the impact of climate change and not thinking about the societal consequences of that? And I think that's something, again, we can maybe dive into a little bit further in questions. And then, again, there were not enough skills and resources associated with this. So both you didn't have the companies didn't have enough people who understood it, and they didn't necessarily have the data, tools and models to be able to make the business case in the way that they wanted. We've heard a lot in this global stocktake about the lack of finance that's flowing to adaptation. And I think this type of findings from the biggest companies shows why. There isn't the pull coming for it from business saying, I understand it. And it's hard sometimes to make the return on investment case of something that isn't necessarily seen as generating cash flows in an easy and measurable way. So that's probably a very quick tour of some of the key findings. Do have a look at it, and very happy to discuss further, because this is about building impetus and making it accessible for business to really identify and make business more resilient, but also seize the opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Emma, for giving such a good summary of this rich report. It sounds like you're describing this initial stage of, I mean, there's definitely more awareness, interest, but we haven't really hit that tipping point yet of accelerated action. So let's talk more about that. But I first want to go to Helmi Abulej to talk a bit about the second report. Maybe we can pass this mic. On social innovation. What can you tell us, given your experience, about social innovation and its role in adaptation, and how can we support social innovators?
First of all, I have to tell you honestly that when my father established SECAM, this social enterprise, 46 years ago, it was not for adaptation and it was not for mitigation, and it was to serve the country with a holistic development project. And just to get an idea what was it all about, in 1977, for us living in Austria, my Egyptian father, my Austrian mother, and my sister and myself, he decided that he wants to go back to Egypt to introduce some models and prototypes for system change he thought Egypt needs after 20 years in Austria. And one of them was Egypt needs a new agriculture, and he was sure that organic agriculture will be the right format for agriculture in a country which was the highest in usage of pesticides and chemical fertilizers in the world per area. And second, everyone told him this is not going to work, not in the desert, not on the Nile, no way, forget about, mission impossible. But he was still firm, and then he said, and by the way, we have to manage our supply chain in a new way. Now it gets really difficult, so you have to fasten your seatbelt, because he said, okay, we will use Iqtisad al-Mahabba. And Iqtisad al-Mahabba in translation means an economy of love. And you can imagine in 1977, telling his family and the people we are going to go for economy of love was really a business case. Everyone told him, yeah, you will lose your little money from Austria and then you go back. So he sold our home in Austria to make sure we are not going back. So, and then he made them all more nervous, my family in Egypt in particular, because he told them, and by the way, companies have a responsibility for human development. People spend all their life in work, and when there is one day moving, when they cannot learn in their job, then they lost the day. So we as a company have a responsibility for human development, potential unfolding of our people. And everyone told him, are you crazy? This is the responsibility of the government. Keep on your business. There is anyhow no organic farming, and there is no economy of love, and then focus on some profits. Huh? And then he added another dimension, and all this is really reflected here. I did read it now, I have to be honest. But he said, and by the way, we are also responsible for our communities, the communities around. We are embedded in these communities. So while we, from the one side, are now committing from the beginning 10% of the working time of our staff for their potential unfolding, we also have to commit 10% of our profits for the community. So everyone told him, yeah, 10% and 10%, and you are not going to make any profits anyhow, so it's easy to commit from something you don't have. So this seemed, I mean, this is a business case you can yourself decide whether you would invest your money in. But in 1977, everyone told him this is not going to work. Now, the reason why I'm here, I'm jumping now 40 years, in 2017 and up till today, a miracle unfolded in the desert, okay? And today, 5,000 farmers all over Egypt and SECAM itself are growing organic products on 200,000 acres, which is 2% of Egypt's area. And 2,500 employees in SECAM produce, believe it or not, in an economy of love supply chain, very competitively, organic products for the local market in Egypt, competing with small companies like Unilever and Nestle and so on. I don't know whether you ever heard the names, but they are our competitors, and we are still the market leaders in some fragments. And this just to tell you that obviously economy of love could be very competitive. How come? Huh? And really our people have a training academy, and 2,500 people all the time, 10% are in training. Huh? And really we have a community of 40,000 people and many, many people around, and in the meantime a university with 3,000 students and schools and so on. So how is this possible? I mean, and I'm just trying to connect it to the topic. Huh? And when we studied then in our university some years ago, also inspired by international COPs and WEFs and so on, where we were invited to come, we started to realize later, not at the beginning, and this is what is really important, it was ingrained in our business, that adaptation and mitigation are part of our business case. Because as in every other agricultural sector in the world, agriculture, 23% of the emissions, and so on. This is what I learned later on. And then when I started to compare, yes, in Egypt, 10 million acres, 50 million tons of emissions, 20% of Egypt's emissions. We are in the... And then I started to realize, but we are increasing organic matter, and our farmers, instead of emitting, sequester carbon in their soils, trees, and compost, and I don't know what. And this is the moment when we said, now we have found a lever for system change. And we started to engage with the voluntary carbon market, and then we delivered a governance system. The government of Egypt helped the World Bank, and I don't know what. And we are now able to upscale our model to 40,000 farmers, where they produce organic products at conventional price. So this is a nice message for the market. Their income is 50% higher because they get the carbon credits for their ecosystem service, and they are honored as climate heroes. And we have potentially in Egypt 60% of all emissions could be offset by farmers. So just to show you this possibility. And of course, mitigation and adaptation you cannot separate. This is the example. We are mitigating big time, but we are also adapting to drought, to water, to all the kind of challenges we are having through this organic farming. So just to close my case, I want to say social enterprises, but every other enterprise in the world can have a very, very successful, profitable, competitive business when it integrates into its business. And this must be a part of the overall vision and mission of the business. This kind of concept of serving not only the community, the people, but also our planet. This is possible to make. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Helmi, for sharing that story. And we should say that your story is one of the examples featured in the report. And I think it's such a beautiful example of indeed how you describe these mitigation, adaptation, social development are in reality integrated. The separation we make here at COP is a bit artificial and increasingly out of date, I think. Thank you so much. So we're going to move to Fakisi Besma, and one of your many roles is indeed co-chair of the Global Center on Adaptation, which focuses on brokering solutions in adaptation. So what do you make of the needs we've heard here, and how can we build this adaptation market and scale business impact on adaptation?
Thank you, and thank you all for being here. Although we are here in a small room on the second floor or first floor of a side building, and we are not in the main hall. And I don't understand it. I really think we make a mistake. Now, I will start with the glass half empty. And during maybe this conversation, we can make it half full, but I will start making it half empty. Although what Helmi is doing in Egypt, big compliments, big compliments. And of course, what Emma did with Peter was making it visible. But listen, this is COP28. And COP28, we are not on track. This is 8 COPs after the famous COP21 in Paris, where we all make clear agreements. And since then, we have never been on track. Never, ever. So, and the IPCC report indicate clearly we will not be in a 1.5 degree, not even 2, 2.5, 3, 3.5. So that is not good. So we need to do more mitigation. We need to take care that we prevent that this is happening to the world. But at the same moment, we see the inability, apparently, of the world to tackle this. So what is then the only logical thing you can do? Is to work harder and to prevent it. But even if that is not working, what is the most logical thing that you can do? Is to adapt yourself to a world of above 1.5 degrees. And to my total surprise, amazement, last 1.5 years, the budgets globally on adaptation are going down, not going up. And I'm agreeing with Emma that since 2 years, I'm glad that it is on the agenda and that we have sessions. But I'm not so happy that 0.5% of the global budgets are funded by business. So business is almost absent, or as Kim calls it, maybe green crowding somewhere, not knowing. I was in another session with a CEO who asked me, I just said it to Heather, could you explain, Mr. Siebesma, a little bit more the difference between mitigation and adaptation? And I thought that's also a nice way of asking, what the hell is adaptation? Why do we do that? A lot of people have no understanding. They think this whole COP is only about mitigation. Nay, it's also about loss and damage. Like finally we make some steps, okay? Budgets are still very, very small. I mean, it is less than 2%, which is allocated now of only the disaster of Pakistan 2 years ago. So, no. But on adaptation, we are nowhere where we need to be. And it is so illogical. It is so irrational what we're doing. I come from a country, the Netherlands. If we would not have worked on adaptation, I would not be here, because 3/4 of the country would not even exist. So it is logical for mankind to adapt to the things that we could not design or make in our own way. And therefore, I think governments need to step up, and they're not doing that enough. We're allocating not enough budgets. We're allocating not enough of our best practices to that. Business need to step up, and I'm very glad that as a Global Center of Adaptation, where we develop the best practices, we work together with the World Economic Forum, with Eric, who is here, with Kim, of mobilizing further the private sector in this. We need to do that. Private sector is absent. And once again, I started with, I don't get it. And to be honest, I really don't get it. I really don't get why we don't do more. For businesses, there's so many reasons to step up, and give 2 reasons. One reason, businesses need to make their own supply chain more resilient. If they don't, due to climate change, they will get disruptions in their own supply chain. All who work with agricultural inputs will get disruptions in their supply chain. So better make your supply chain more resilient, because otherwise your operations will stop. Those who have locations which will be flooded have disruptions in your supply chain or your whole factory. Those in South Africa who are in areas where from time to time there's no drinking water, don't think that your workers will come to your factory if there's no drinking water. So there's all kinds of reasons to make your operations, your supply chain, much more resilient. The second reason for business is, and it's not a dirty word, to make money. Business can make money by providing the solutions to be more resilient, providing the solutions to countries to deal with climate change, to develop seeds or agriculture techniques who can survive during droughts or during floodings, or protection of infrastructure, protections of cities, or water systems. And if companies can provide the solutions and the technological innovations and make money with that, I'm fine with that. Then we adapt to that new world. So I start with, I don't get it. I think we should not be here, but in the main hall, because the main negotiators, I mean, we're all entourage. I mean, there are 200 negotiators in the main room and 105,000 entourage around it. But nevertheless, the main negotiators should realize that this is a serious topic. And then I close and then I hand over to you. Several African leaders have said to me, we Africans, and the same counts for Bangladesh, etc., we suffer the most. We Africans, we cost the least. And we are not so sure how much you take care of that. And some people said, well, that's not a helpful statement. We need to collaborate and work together. I said, well, I don't know what's helpful or not. At least it's inconvenient, but I don't think it's incorrect. So let's step up on this topic. Thanks.
Thank you very much for that strong message. What I picked up a little bit was, can we do more on the pull factor? I think also from a scientific point of view, we know the needs, the risks, but how do we get businesses to indeed see these opportunities that you talked about? What will be the solar panel for adaptation, these iconic technologies or products that really help us move up that S-curve of uptake of new innovations? I wanted to ask you all a question, though, on multi-stakeholderism. We have many governments here, as you mentioned. What message would you want to give to them when it comes to increasing multi-stakeholderism in adaptation specifically?
Who do you want to go first?
Would you like to start?
Yeah, okay. Just before I answer this question of the multi-stakeholder part, I have my own belief that unless we are able to find market-driven mechanisms like the photovoltaic module, the day when the system change happened was the day when it was cheaper than the other electricity. Okay, it did. Otherwise, you are always depending on donations and I don't know what, and it will stay 2, 3, 4%, as organic agriculture is 6% until today. The day organic products will be cheaper, it will mainstream. So market-driven mechanisms, whatever they are, and there must be ecosystem services and many things. I don't want to go into this, but this is for me as a social entrepreneur who do not believe that we can leave it to the governments and the negotiators to save the planet, and I want to involve myself. This is what I'm searching for every day from the morning to the evening. How can I do it? But the multi-stakeholder part is as important, of course, because I can tell you this whole story I was telling you about upscaling to 40,000, 250,000 farmers and so on, did only work because from the one side, we are backwards integrated into the communities and societies of Egypt, and these 40,000 farmers come from every single district of Egypt because we have 46 years where we were building our relationship and a strong network, which over such principles like the economy of love, of course, also built trust, built a feeling of being one family or being one partnership. Then, of course, it needs all of your own environment to really create a feeling that each one of your employees is your partners, is one of those who wants to learn and wants to contribute and wants to be happy and wants to excel. That makes the difference. But last not least also, of course, you have always to look what is your client and how desirable is your product for your client, and how can you really also find a way that he likes your product. And when this all is not embedded in a system where then education, research, and government can come in and you are in a meaningful relationship, the governance system we are using at the moment, that our economy of love, carbon credits, whole system carbon credits, agriculture carbon credits, are auctioned on the Egyptian stock exchange with the financial regulatory declaration how to do it. I mean, this is a wonderful example that this is social innovation, and this is why it works. And the carbon credits stay in Egypt, by the way. They are not exported to Holland or anywhere else. This only works if you are in an open dialogue and if you can establish your case without everyone expecting you want to get some money in your pocket. So I think it's very, very important, and without it, there's no chance.
Over to you, Emma.
So this is a really kind of basic question. Why? How should we all be talking to each other, and why aren't we talking to each other? But it's sort of got really hard attributes to it. We've been talking about multi-stakeholder collaboration on mitigation for years now, and we're starting to get somewhere. Adaptation was on the agenda at the beginning, but then nobody talked about it or did anything about it because it was seen as failure. So the lack of knowledge that we have, I think, is a real barrier at the moment. So I'd probably start by saying we need to improve the knowledge. We need to be in the halls talking about adaptation because it's hitting us here and now. But we need to get that multi-stakeholder dialogue about what what are the impacts? What's the data? What's the tools? What are the KPIs we should be using? We don't have the frame of reference. If you look at mitigation, we've built up this whole language around TCFD, what you do with it, science-based targets initiative, how companies do it. If you look at nature, which has also rocketed up the agenda, that's got a parallel universe to that. So companies know how to do it. It's going into regulation and creating an enabling framework. Within adaptation, we haven't got any of that. We haven't got the language at the first place to have the dialogues around. So we need to get those simple frameworks that start to give the ability to say, right, okay, where are the disconnects? Where do we work together? What are the data and tools? And then what are the policy needs that will drive the commercial case for businesses to prioritize and to invest, and that will put the framework out there for finance to flow? And how does that finance get into regulation? How do we then actually also get businesses to disclose, as you were saying, with proper measures that are comparable so that businesses can be judged as to how they are doing well or badly? But doing all of that somehow, and this is a hard bit, without imposing on business a whole load more tasks, if you like, that they haven't got the bandwidth or the skills for. So I think it starts with dialogue. It starts with that public-private dialogue. It starts with that transparency as to how the system might be made to work, getting some good examples, putting them out there, getting then finance to flow behind it, getting investors to ask for it, stock exchanges to recognize the risk. You see it happening. Adaptation it's very local, so you need dialogue at a national level, a regional level, and at very much a local level. You need to listen to people and communities, indigenous peoples, etc. It's got to actually involve everybody. And that real multi-stakeholder bit is hard to organize, right? And it's very easy to just have discussion and then nothing happen about it. So it's actually getting actionable projects that demonstrate progress and then driving that more at scale for me. But if we can get it into the mainstream agenda in the first place, get targets set against it, get those KPIs that governments feel responsible for. National adaptation plans, there aren't enough of them, and businesses have never read them, and they don't feel they're responsible for delivering them. So we've got a problem here, right? It's just a disconnect. Even the best of the national adaptation plans, the UK has a pretty good adaptation plan, but are we actually implementing it, and where are we at on it? All of that needs to get more into mainstream dialogue if we're to get the urgency of action that we need to see.
Thank you so much. Would you like to comment on multi-stakeholderism?
Do I want to comment on multi-stakeholderism? I mean, is there any other way? It is a strange statement, I think. Should we approach this via a multi-stakeholder approach? Oh, really? Is there any other approach in the world? I mean, the whole World Economic Forum only exists by a multi-stakeholder approach. I mean, there is no other approach. When the economy started 10,000, 100,000 years ago, it started by barter trade. You do this, I do this, you're better than this, I do this, and we exchange. Later on, we invented gold, and we invented paper money, which is worse as now. We even don't have the money. I mean, only 7% of the money is there. The rest is written down on a computer, and we all believe it's there, but it isn't. And I mean, the whole economy started with helping each other. And now where we see where we ended up, there are billions, not millions, billions of people who suffer. Billions of people whose life is being threatened. So the only approach is a multi-stakeholder approach. And in that sense, how the economy ever started, Helmi has a very strange business. And he even has a stranger name. Although I admire what he does, but I want to take away the way he calls himself. Because I want that everybody calls himself like Helmi. He is a social entrepreneur. I ask myself, what is a non-social entrepreneur? I mean, he takes care of corporate social responsibility. There are companies who takes it very serious, with social responsibility. Oh, really? Are there also companies who say, well, our company, to be honest, we are just there for the economic benefit, we have no social responsibility? If you have no social responsibility and a part of our society, I would almost say, get out of my society. What should society do with companies who do not take the social responsibility? We form our society together, with companies, with people, etc. And therefore it is only one approach of companies, of governments, etc., and to work together, making society better for all. And I think that is not happening enough. And therefore you have people like Helmi, I admire, who steps up. But to be honest, I hope to create a world in which that is not needed anymore and everybody feels it in the same way. In that extent, you can argue, indeed, as I said, what are we doing here? Here, and that is the UN concept, the 200 negotiators or 500, whatever it is, are having the power. And I understand that. That is the model. That is how the UN works. Although I argued, should business not play a much more important role here at the COP? No, no, no. Why not? You're not democratically chosen. Well, to be honest, not all countries present here are all democratically chosen. So that is not a fair argument. Well, we cannot hold you responsible as business. Well, after 28 COPs, I cannot say that we could hold all the governments in the world who agreed on the Paris Agreement totally responsible. But it would be very good if business, like Helmi said, step up and be very transparent, very visible here, make sectorial approaches and agreements and say, this is our commitment to the world. Not like is happening now in all kinds of business groups and behind closed doors. No, as open as the world negotiates, I would love to see the business also there and committing themselves. And that is the world I would like to create. And therefore, building on your question, we need the public sector, obviously. But the public sector is not the biggest emitter. The private sector is the biggest emitter. So we need the private sector with much more visibility, much more transparency, much more commitment here. And that's the only way it works. One small remark and then I close on the voluntary carbon markets, because Helmi knows very well in his work on that. I'm very strong promoter, was the first chairman of the carbon pricing initiatives after the Paris Agreement. The compliance market is there, although only 25% of all the emissions globally are covered by a carbon price. The voluntary market is there, but the voluntary market, I'm really scared about the voluntary carbon market, because there's a total lack of certification of credibility of the credits. And if no independent institution is giving credibility to the credits, then it will evaporate. So I like what Helmi is doing here, but I don't like the context in which we operate. So the only approach is a multi-stakeholder approach, like I indicated, for people today and generations to come. Thanks.
Thank you so much. So it's not an option. We should all be social entrepreneurs. We need to wrap up, unfortunately. I wanted to give you all a last opportunity to maybe draw it back a little bit to adaptation, the adaptation agenda. If you could say something very brief on what would you like to see, what would be your priority action on adaptation next year, 2024? If we could start with Emma, Helmi, and then with Feike.
So I think I'll probably take two. I think for business to really wake up and realize that adaptation is real, climate change is happening, they're more exposed than they think, do the analysis, understand where you are, and then look for where the opportunities are and think about the role that you can play in all the areas that you operate in, because otherwise your business is not going to be a viable business into the future. So that's kind of one area. And then I think the second thing is finance. So we haven't talked a lot about finance. Finance is a massive enabler, right? It drives the financial system. On adaptation, it's tiny. Feike was saying, it's a trivial amount relative to what's needed. So I would love to see real progress in the financial system for the creation of proper asset classes that recognize the value in adaptation and work out how to reward, how to price, how that can actually flow at scale. And that's going to need a newer creativity around risk, concession capital, blended finance, etc. We may have progress on loss and damage. The numbers are way too small, right? But we don't want to wait for it to come to loss and damage. We want to take action now. There's great studies on how much avoided, the return on avoided cost, 12 times or something like that in the Standard Chartered study that they did. So why aren't we making the business case for that? So I'd love to see progress on that.
Thanks a lot. Helmi.
So I would try to tell the story not as mitigation, adaptation. I really would try to call it again, it's a holistic business model, a sustainable, resilient business model, which integrates this both, and which can fulfill all the reporting requirements which are coming up and which are putting pressure, and which first through self-selected true cost accounting gives itself the transparency to understand what are we doing and what are the real costs of our products and services, because there is a huge, huge distortion in the market, and we see the wrong products and wrong prices on products and services in the market, and over time, either out of crisis or out of enlightenment, this will merge, and we will see true prices, and this will change the landscape. So I really would promote every business in the world to make a true cost accounting for itself, and then adaptation and mitigation is factored in.
Excellent, thank you. Final reflection from Feike.
Yeah, well, what I would like to, what do I like? I would like that I'm back at COP30, and that I can say, I do get it again. At COP28, I said, I don't get it. I don't get why we neglect such an obvious thing. I hope that at COP30 I say, I get it again. And what happens then? That happens then that together with the World Economic Forum and GCA, we have activated the voice and the actions of the business. That I hope. That we understand that for many people in the global south, adaptation is needed today to survive. Adaptation is not that we have some cellars underwater or some roads being flooded. Adaptation for them is that they still have food to survive now. So I hope that at COP30 I get it again. And I said, hey, the world gets it again. And we give this full priority, not only from the public sector, but also from the private sector. And to be honest, if I want to have that feeling then I need to work hard now. And I will put all my commitment in that to achieve that. And I see Kim nodding. And with great pleasure working with her and our excellent team. Erik is sitting there, working with other people of the Global Center of Adaptation to get this done. Thank you.
Thank you. I think we heard lots of concrete advice, true cost accounting, but also the inspiration we need at this moment to push this agenda. So with that, we'd like to thank everyone. You have copies of one of the reports, and the other one, I believe, can be found on the web homepage. And thank you so much for your attention. And let's give a big hand to the panel again.